Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material.
Thanks for having me back.
You know, when you watch a survival movie, the climax is almost always the escape.
Right, the big dramatic getaway.
Exactly. The burning building collapses just as the hero dives out the window, or the survivors finally drag themselves onto the beach after the shipwreck.
And then the screen fades to black.
Yeah. The triumphant music swells, and we just naturally assume they all lived happily ever after. But what those movies never show you is the morning after.
Oh, man, yeah, the reality check.
Right. They skip over the residual trauma, the paranoia, the inevitable infighting on the beach, or just the absolute terror of realizing, hey, you survived the disaster, but now you actually have to figure out how to live together without completely destroying each other.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
It is. And that brings us to the profound material we are exploring today. We are welcoming you to a deep dive into the book of Exodus, specifically chapters 19 through 40.
A really dense, fascinating section.
Yeah, and we've got a massive stack of sources on the table today. Historical commentaries, sociological research, ancient Near Eastern cultural analyses, and theological translations.
We really pulled from everywhere for this one.
We did, and our mission is to act as your guides through all this research, extracting the practical wisdom and real-life application from these ancient texts. Because that survival movie scenario, that is exactly what the Israelites are facing in this part of the text.
It truly is the ultimate morning after story.
Yeah.
To set the scene based on the historical context in our sources, the Israelites are about 2 months out from what the texts often refer to as the iron furnace of Egypt.
Wow, iron furnace, that's bleak.
Yeah, it's a brutal metaphor. They've experienced this miraculous, reality-altering deliverance. The physical chains are gone. But the psychological chains, the deep-seated habits of enslaved people, those are still very much intact.
Right, you can take the people out of Egypt, but taking Egypt out of the people is a whole different project.
Exactly. They possess physical freedom, but they desperately lack an internal framework. The overarching theme of all the research we're looking at today is transformation.
Okay, so how do they transform?
Well, the question the text wrestles with is how does a traumatized, fractured group of people who have only ever known the brutal hierarchy of Egypt transform into what the text calls a kingdom of priests and a holy nation?
And the way this framework is introduced is incredibly cinematic. I was reading through the descriptions in our source material. And before the text gives us a single rule, before we get to any of the famous commandments, it spends a huge amount of time establishing the environment.
Yeah, it sets a very specific stage.
We're at Mount Sinai. And it is not a quiet pastoral scene. It sounds terrifying.
Oh, the setting is designed to be completely overwhelming. Imagine a massive, rugged mountain in a barren desert. The text describes thick clouds descending upon the peak, smoke billowing up like a furnace, devouring fire.
Just total sensory overload.
Exactly. The incredibly loud sound of trumpets echoing off the rocks and ground-shaking thunder. The people are trembling at the base of the mountain.
It sounds like a horror movie.
It does, but many of the historical commentaries we reviewed, like those from Matthew Henry, point out that this sensory overload wasn't a punishment.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It wasn't about scaring them into mindless submission. It was a deeply psychological maneuver to prove them. The goal was to instill a profound, obedient reverence.
So they needed to take it seriously.
Right. They needed a tangible, sensible discovery of majesty so that they would take the ensuing covenant seriously. You have to remember, they had just left a culture where the pharaoh was considered a living god, commanding massive armies and building pyramids.
So the God of the Israelites needed to demonstrate a power that completely dwarfed the empire they had just escaped.
Exactly. He had to be bigger than Pharaoh.
Right in the middle of that terrifying majesty, though, there was this tender image that really caught my eye.
The eagle imagery.
Yeah. Before laying down any lies, God reminds them of how he brought them out of Egypt. And he uses this beautiful phrase. He says he bore them on eagle's wings.
It's a gorgeous metaphor.
I was looking at our notes here, and the sources spend a lot of time unpacking the biology and mythology of the eagle in the ancient world. Why is that specific bird so important to understanding the rules that follow?
Well, the eagle metaphor completely reorients how we are supposed to read everything that comes after it. When an eagle carries its young, it doesn't carry them in its talons like other birds of prey.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, it carries them on its back, upon its wings. In the ancient understanding, this meant that if a predator or an archer wanted to harm the young eaglet, they had to shoot through the parent first.
Wow. That is powerful.
The parent places its own body between the danger right below and the child above. By using this metaphor, God is establishing that he put himself between the Israelites and the Egyptian army. He absorbed the threat.
I was looking through the theological analyses we gathered, and they kept bringing up a Latin phrase regarding this dynamic, ex metamotu.
Yes, ex metamotu.
I don't speak Latin, so what are the scholars getting at there, and how does it connect to the eagle metaphor?
It essentially translates to out of his own mere motion, or purely out of his own goodwill. The scholars use it to describe how the agreement between God and Israel was entirely initiated by God's free grace.
So it wasn't a negotiation.
Not at all. He didn't approach a free, successful, wealthy people and say, if you obey my rules, I will protect you. He went to helpless, broken slaves, defeated their oppressors, carried them out on eagle's wings, and then gave them the rules.
Ah, the order matters.
Exactly. The deliverance was not a reward for their obedience. Their obedience was meant to be the grateful response to their deliverance. Grace precedes the law. He is saying, because I have redeemed you, here is the architecture of how free people live.
Hold on, though. Moses comes down from the mountain, lays out the general idea of this covenant, and the text says the people immediately respond with one voice. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do.
Yeah, they agree immediately.
They just blindly agree to everything. It feels exactly like when I download a new app on my phone, and that massive wall of legally binding text pops up for the terms of service.
Right, the endless scroll.
Yeah, just scroll rapidly to the bottom and click, I agree, because I want to get to the good stuff. I want the features of the app.
And the Israelites want the promised land, they want the food, they want the protection.
Exactly. But based on our sociological sources, is there any way they actually understood what they were signing up for?
They almost certainly did not grasp the full weight of it. They wanted the benefits of the covenant, which is entirely human, but they lacked the internal fortitude to actually live out the demands of it.
We were just clicking, I agree.
Yeah. They were enthusiastic, but completely naive to their own weaknesses. The trauma of Egypt had wired them for survival, not for holiness. And that gap between their enthusiastic agreement and their actual psychological capacity is exactly why the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, had to be so meticulously detailed.
Let's dig into those commandments, because I think modern readers gloss over them since they are so culturally ubiquitous.
We've all heard them a million times.
Right. But looking at the historical comparative studies in our stack, the Decalogue was radically unique. The second commandment, the one forbidding the making of graven images or idols, really stood out in the research.
It's a huge shift from the surrounding cultures.
Our sources point out that human beings have an almost gravitational pull toward idolatry. Why is the human brain so desperate for a physical statue?
Because the human brain craves control and predictability.
Okay, that makes sense.
An invisible, infinite, omnipresent deity is terrifying because you cannot manage it. If you have a physical idol, a localized statue of wood or stone, you can feed it, you can move it, you can appease it with specific rituals, and most importantly, you can lock it in a temple when you want to ignore it.
Wow, yeah. You can put it away.
Exactly. The prohibition against idols was a prohibition against trying to domesticate the divine.
Right.
Our historical sources note how difficult this concept was to maintain, even for later civilizations.
Didn't one of the commentaries mention Rome?
Yes. For example, the early Roman king Numa recognized the philosophical danger of idols and forbade them, but later institutions consistently caved to the public demand for visual representation.
I read in one of those commentaries that centuries later, certain religious institutions actually combined the first and second commandments just so they could split the 10th commandment into two.
Yeah, the theological gymnastics there are fascinating.
They did it to keep the number at 10, while effectively obscuring the strict ban on making physical images. It shows how badly we want to hold our security in our own hands.
You really do.
But speaking of that 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, this feels like a massive paradigm shift.
It is the most radical of all of them.
The other commandments, don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery. A judge can look at physical evidence and say, yes, you stole that ox, but do not covet. How do you legislate an internal desire?
You can't legislate it in a civil court, which is what makes it so revolutionary. The commentators in our research stack emphasize that the 10th commandment strikes at the absolute root of all human conflict.
The root of it all.
It forbids the inordinate, consuming desire for what belongs to someone else. Coveting is the language of discontent. If only I had his house, her career, their wealth, then I would be safe, then I would be happy.
Oh, that is so relevant today.
Totally. The text is forcing the individual to recognize that true righteousness isn't just about restraining your hands from stealing. It's about interrogating the quiet, invisible longings of your heart. The external actions of theft or violence are merely the smoke. Coveting is the fire.
After all these foundational laws are given, the text describes this stunning scene of ratification in chapter 24.
The feast on the mountain.
Yeah. Moses, Aaron, and the 70 elders go up the mountain. The text says they actually see the God of Israel, but the description is wild. They don't describe a face or a body, they just describe the ground beneath him.
Just the pavement.
Right. They describe a paved work of sapphire stone, as clear as the sky itself, directly under his feet. And they eat and drink there without being destroyed. I was trying to wrap my head around this sapphire pavement. What is the symbolic weight of that detail?
The symbolism is a profound reorientation of value. Sapphire was and remains one of the most precious, highly valued stones to human beings. Wars are fought over wealth like that.
Sure, it's incredibly valuable.
Yet, in this vision, the absolute peak of human wealth and material obsession is merely the floorboards of the divine palace. It is the dust under God's feet.
That is such a striking image.
The visual is communicating to the elders that the material security they will be tempted to worship in the future is fundamentally subordinate to the spiritual reality they're experiencing in that moment.
That immediately makes me think about how this translates to a modern listener. Like, what are your sapphire pavements?
That's a great question to ask yourself.
What is the status, the wealth, or the material security that you are striving for? The thing you consider to be the ultimate goal of your life? This ancient text is suggesting that if you place your absolute devotion on those things, you are worshiping the floorboards.
You're worshiping the dirt.
Exactly. You are elevating things that are meant to be under your feet. It's a brilliant poetic check on material obsession.
It is a beautiful ideal, but ideals are easiest to maintain when you are having a transcendent experience on a mountaintop.
Yeah, reality hits pretty hard when you come down.
The real challenge, and where the text goes next, is translating those high-minded transcendent commandments down into the dirt, the dust, and the daily friction of a massive encampment of people.
And this is where I hit a massive wall in the reading. We move out of the 10 Commandments and dive straight into the judicial laws.
Yeah, chapters 21 through 23.
I'm reading through those chapters, and frankly, I was shocked. The text suddenly starts giving rules about buying and selling servants, laws about men selling their daughters, and some truly brutal capital punishments.
It's very jarring for modern readers.
I'm reading this as someone looking for moral wisdom. I'm thinking, wait a minute. I thought this was supposed to be a holy nation. If God is writing the laws, why doesn't he just completely abolish slavery, patriarchy, and all this ancient brutality on day one?
It is one of the most common and understandable hurdles for modern readers. The sociological and historical commentaries in our stack address this extensively.
So how do they explain it?
We have to avoid the anachronistic mistake of reading 21st century human rights frameworks back into the late Bronze Age.
Okay, fair enough.
The insight here is that God was meeting a deeply flawed, historically situated people exactly where they were. If you look at the surrounding ancient Near Eastern law codes, like the Code of Hammurabi, they are infinitely more brutal, often treating lower-class humans strictly as disposable property.
So it was a relative improvement.
Absolutely. What the judicial laws in Exodus are doing is stepping into the mud of that reality and placing strict, unprecedented boundaries around the brutality.
Regulating it instead of abolishing it.
Right. The text is regulating and limiting systems that the society was not yet economically or socially equipped to survive without, while simultaneously planting the seeds of human dignity that would eventually dismantle those very systems.
So it's about trajectory. It's a progression away from absolute barbarism. I guess the most famous example of that is the lex talionis, the law of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Oh, yeah. Widely misunderstood.
In our culture today, if someone says an eye for an eye, they usually mean they are going to get revenge. They use it to justify hitting back. But our research says that's a complete misinterpretation of how it functioned historically, right?
It's exactly the opposite of how we use it today. To understand an eye for an eye, you have to understand the ancient concept of the blood feud.
The blood feud.
Yeah. Prior to this kind of legislation, if you accidentally or intentionally knocked out my tooth, my natural, unchecked human inclination would be to gather my family, burn down your house, and kill your relatives.
Just total escalation.
The natural human response to injury is disproportionate escalation. The lex talionis was not a mandate for private individual to take revenge. It was a strict instruction to the civil judges to ensure that the punishment strictly fit the crime and went absolutely no further.
Oh, wow. So it was a ceiling.
It was a ceiling on retaliation, not a floor. It stopped the cycle of generational violence. It was a massive leap forward in the concept of objective, proportional justice.
That context completely flips the script. Instead of a barbaric rule, it's actually an emergency brake on human vengeance.
Exactly.
And nestled within these ancient civic codes, I found some core wisdom that felt stunningly relevant today, specifically regarding how we handle negligence.
Oh, the property laws.
Yeah, the text goes to great lengths to describe what happens if a man's ox gores someone, or if a man digs a pit, leaves it uncovered, and his neighbor's animal falls in. Or, my personal favorite, a fire catches in thorns and burns down a neighbor's crops. It seems like the law is hyper-focused on accidents.
The underlying ethical principle is staggering. You are not just responsible for the harm you cause intentionally, you are equally accountable for the harm you allow to happen through your own carelessness.
That is a heavy burden.
It is. If you know your ox is dangerous and you fail to pen it up, the animal's actions become your actions in the eyes of the law. You cannot plead ignorance if you fail to take reasonable precautions. The community's safety supersedes your right to be lazy.
If we apply that fire and thorns rule to the 21st century, it completely changes how I look at my digital life.
How so?
Well, think about someone carelessly lighting a small fire to clear some brush. The wind catches it, the thorns ignite, and suddenly the neighbor's entire wheat field is gone. The person didn't intend to burn the field, but they are still held liable. Apply that to how we interact online. What happens when we carelessly share a sensational false report on social media?
That's a brilliant connection. The commentators point out that the text explicitly addresses this. It says, "Thou shalt not raise a false report." But in the original Hebrew, the phrasing also heavily implies, "Thou shalt not receive a false report."
Wait, receiving it is treated as a crime.
Essentially, yes.
When we hit share or repost on an unverified sensational story that ends up ruining someone's reputation, we're the ones letting the fire catch in the thorns. We might defend ourselves by saying, well, I didn't write the article, I just shared it.
But the text doesn't let you off the hook for that.
No. This ancient wisdom says, you didn't guard the fire, the wind caught it, and now you are responsible for the ashes. It demands a level of media literacy and personal accountability that is incredibly challenging.
It is challenging because it requires resisting the crowd. And the text anticipates this struggle. It commands the judges and the citizens. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil.
A multitude.
Yeah. The law recognizes the immense, almost intoxicating psychological pressure of popular consensus.
But how do we actually do that, practically speaking? Because the multitude isn't just a physical crowd in the town square anymore. It is a globally connected, algorithmically driven echo chamber.
It's in our pockets all day long.
Right. Our social feeds are engineered to create a multitude that shouts the exact same outrage at us all day long. How do we resist when it feels like our entire curated world is demanding that we join the mob?
It requires an intense level of self-interrogation. The original instruction was for judges not to be swayed by the outcries of the majority if the objective facts pointed elsewhere.
So we have to be our own judges.
In our modern context, yes. We all have to act as our own judges. We have to separate the sheer volume of the outrage from the actual truth of the matter. We have to pause and ask ourselves, am I adopting this opinion because I have researched it and found it to be true and just? Or am I adopting it simply because it is what my specific digital tribe currently demands to signal loyalty?
That's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. General usage or popular consensus never magically transforms a bad practice into a good one.
The text actually gives a practical exercise for breaking out of that tribalism, and it is brutally difficult.
The law about the enemy's ox.
Yeah. It states that if you see your enemy's ox or donkey going astray, or lying crushed under its burden, you cannot just walk past it. You are legally and morally obligated to bring it back to him, or to help him lift the burden off the animal.
That law forces you to physically cross the aisle. It shatters the tribal boundary.
It really does.
It dictates that the welfare of the community and even the humane treatment of the animal absolutely supersedes your personal grievances and rivalries.
Think about what that looks like tomorrow at work or in your social circle. You see a colleague, maybe even a rival, who has actively undermined you in the past, making a catastrophic error. Their ox is wandering off toward a cliff.
What do you do?
Exactly. What is your internal default setting? Do you stand back, grab some popcorn, and watch them ruin their career? Or do you step in, warn them, and help them up? Because true justice, according to this framework, demands that you protect even your enemy from avoidable ruin.
It is a beautiful ethic, but human beings are notoriously bad at sustaining that kind of discipline.
That's true.
Especially when the environment changes. We see this vividly as the narrative progresses. The community has just sworn to uphold these beautiful laws of justice, but then Moses goes up the mountain and disappears into a burning cloud for 40 days.
Just poof, gone.
The leadership vanishes. Nature abhors a vacuum, and human nature, when placed under the stress of uncertainty and isolation, reverts almost instantly to its oldest, most toxic coping mechanisms.
Let's talk about that reversion, because the story of the golden calf in chapters 32 through 34 is probably one of the most famous failures in human history.
It's a catastrophic failure.
I want to understand the psychology here. Moses is gone for over a month. They are in a harsh wilderness. The anxiety of the unknown becomes unbearable. They surround Aaron and demand that he make them gods to go before them. And Aaron crafts a golden calf.
Out of their own jewelry.
Right. But looking at the cultural research in our stack, why a calf? Why not a lion or an eagle?
The choice of the calf is deeply tied to their trauma and their past. They had spent 400 years in Egypt. The Egyptians venerated the Apis bull in Memphis and the Nevis bull in Heliopolis, which was located right on the border of Goshen where the Israelites lived.
So they saw this imagery constantly.
Their entire lives, they had seen these massive, golden, powerful symbols. The ox or calf was the ultimate symbol of strength, vitality, and agricultural prosperity. Under the extreme psychological stress of thinking Moses was dead and they were abandoned in the desert, they regressed.
They went back to what they knew.
They reached for the visual, tangible security blankets they knew from their enslavement. They wanted something they could see and touch to alleviate their panic.
What I found most fascinating and terrifying in the commentaries is that they didn't necessarily think they were abandoning their God.
No, they didn't.
Aaron finishes crafting this golden calf, and what does he actually say to the crowd? He proclaims, "Tomorrow is a feast to Yahweh." He slaps the specific covenant name of God right onto the Egyptian idol.
The scholars refer to this as syncretism, and it is the most subtle and dangerous form of idolatry.
Syncretism, meaning blending them together.
Exactly. They weren't overtly saying, let's worship the Egyptian sun god instead of the God who delivered us. They were attempting to merge the two. They were saying, let's take the invisible, uncontrollable, terrifying God of the mountain, and let's reduce him into this manageable golden trinket that we can carry with us.
Let's worship him, but on our terms.
Using the methods of the empire we just left?
They wanted the power and protection of God without the unpredictability of God. They wanted to shrink the infinite down to fit their personal preferences. And can we analyze Aaron's leadership failure here?
It's a textbook case of bad leadership.
Because looking at how he handles this crisis, he looks like the ultimate tragic, weak middle manager. Who's left in charge, the crowd gets anxious and angry, and instead of holding the line of the company values the covenant, they all just swore a blood oath to suit. He completely caves.
He folds under the pressure immediately.
He facilitates their bad behavior, takes their gold, makes the idol, and then tries to manage the PR fallout by calling it a feast to Yahweh. I couldn't help but wonder how often leaders today compromise their core values just to keep the crowd from turning on them.
It is a perennial failure of leadership.
Oh.
Aaron took the path of least resistance. He likely justified it to himself, thinking he was keeping the peace, or perhaps taking a wrong measure of their fanaticism, hoping a small compromise would appease them.
But it never works that way.
No. Accommodating a toxic demand from a frightened multitude never satisfies the multitude. It only normalizes the toxicity. By validating their panic with a physical idol, he completely facilitated their moral corruption.
If we translate this to our lives today, we have to realize that the human impulse to build golden calves hasn't disappeared. The materials have just changed.
Oh, we build them all the time.
We don't usually melt down our earrings into farm animals, but the underlying psychology is identical. A golden calf is created whenever we take something that is meant to be a good tool or a source of stability like our technology, our political affiliations, our careers, or our financial portfolios, and we elevate it to become the ultimate source of our security and identity.
We make it our God.
We make it the thing we absolutely cannot live without. We make it our God because we can measure it, we can look at it in a bank account, and we mistakenly believe we can control it.
And the fallout of this misplaced trust is immediate and severe. The text tells us that the covenant is shattered, literally. Moses comes down the mountain, sees the revelry, and shatters the stone tablets of the law on the ground.
A visual representation of the broken deal.
It appears that the entire experiment of forming a holy nation is over before it even begins. The divine response is one of overwhelming wrath, with a threat to consume the people and start over entirely with Moses.
But this crisis is where Moses proves himself to be a radically different kind of leader than Aaron. Instead of saving himself, Moses stands in the gap. He intercedes.
He steps right into the line of fire.
He goes back up the mountain and essentially says, "If you will not forgive their sin, then blot my name out of the book you have written." He ties his own eternal fate to the fate of these rebellious, flawed people. He refuses to succeed if they fail.
It is a stunning display of mediatorial love. He is acting as the true priest for the people. And what is beautiful is how the text describes the response to this intercession. God doesn't just begrudgingly agree not to destroy them. He responds by revealing the core of his character.
Oh, the passage in chapter 34.
Yes, he passes before Moses and declares his own name. The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. It reveals that even in the face of the ultimate betrayal dancing around a golden cow while the ink on the covenant is barely dry, the absolute foundation of the relationship remains mercy.
But the research also points out that while the relationship is restored, the recovery of people isn't instantaneous. There is this fascinating detail hidden in the text about how they're going to take the promised land.
The pacing of the conquest.
Yeah. God tells them he is going to drive out their enemies, but he explicitly says he will not do it all in 1 year. He says he will drive them out by little and little, and the reason given is fascinating. It's lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against them.
The sociological commentaries draw out a profound psychological parallel here. The text is illustrating the wisdom of gradual growth.
How does that connect to the wild beasts?
Well, if an army were to instantly wipe out all the inhabitants of a massive region, the new, smaller conquering population wouldn't be able to maintain the agriculture or the cities. The infrastructure would collapse, and literal wild beasts, lions, bears, wolves, would move in and take over the ruins.
So they literally couldn't handle the empty space.
Right. Spiritually and psychologically, if we were to instantly conquer all our external problems and internal flaws without the slow, arduous process of building character, the wild beast of pride would multiply and completely devour us. We would become insufferably arrogant and self-sufficient.
That concept completely stops me in my tracks. Think about how much we crave instant optimization.
We want everything right now.
We live in a culture of life hacks. We want the 30-day shred for our bodies, a weekend seminar to fix our marriages, and an app to optimize our mental health. We want all our enemies and obstacles eliminated in 1 year.
But this ancient wisdom is suggesting that instant perfection is actually dangerous to your soul.
Exactly. Can you accept gradual growth in your own life? Can you accept that your ongoing struggles, conquered little by little, are actually keeping you grounded, keeping you dependent, and keeping you safe from the wild beasts of your own ego?
Accepting gradual growth requires immense patience. And to maintain that patience, a community needs a daily environment, a physical and temporal rhythm that constantly reinforces the truth of who they are becoming.
Which brings us to the final major section of our research.
Right, the incredibly detailed blueprints for the tabernacle, found in chapters 25 through 31, and then executed in chapters 39 and 40.
The covenant was shattered by the golden calf, but restored through grace. The lingering question is, how does a perfectly holy, infinitely powerful God actually dwell in the middle of a deeply flawed, easily distracted camp of people without his presence completely consuming them?
And the answer is this massive architectural project. The scholars call it the architecture of communion.
It's like a portable temple, right?
Yes. The tabernacle was unprecedented. Prior to this, individuals like Abraham or Jacob built temporary stone altars where they had specific encounters with God. But this is entirely different. This is a royal palace, a localized, highly structured sanctuary.
Right in the middle of everything.
It was designed so that the divine king could dwell continually among his subjects, right in the geographic center of their camp. And crucially, the materials for this massive project were not gathered by a forced tax. The text insists it was a voluntary, joyful offering taken only from every man that giveth it willingly with his heart.
I have to admit, reading these chapters was a grind.
Oh, they are notoriously difficult to get through.
Anyone who has tried to read the Bible straight through usually hits a wall here. You get chapter after chapter of microscopic, painstaking detail. Make the curtains of fine twined linen. Use blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. Make exactly 50 loops on the edge of one curtain. Make 50 clasps of gold. Measure the wood in cubits. It goes on and on.
It's very repetitive.
I was looking at the structure of the text, and the contrast is staggering. In Genesis, the creation of the entire universe, the galaxies, the oceans, the complexity of all life takes one short, highly poetic chapter. But to build a tent in the middle of a desert, it takes nearly 15 chapters of agonizing, repetitive architectural detail. Why the sudden shift to an engineering manual?
The commentators provide a brilliant psychological and theological answer for this. While the vastness of nature displays God's raw, unfiltered power, the tabernacle reveals the specific, intimate, and highly intentional methods of his grace.
So the details prove the care.
Exactly. More importantly, consider the timing and what the Israelites had just done. The golden calf was a product of emotional chaos, panic, and human improvisation. They threw gold into a fire and let their anxiety dictate their worship.
So they needed structure.
The antidote to the chaos of idolatry is divine order. By giving them 15 chapters of hyper-specific instructions, God is teaching them that approaching the divine is not a free-for-all of emotional frenzy. It requires structure, careful obedience, intentional beauty, and meticulous care. The order of the architecture was meant to restructure their chaotic minds.
And the specific pieces of furniture inside this structure are loaded with meaning. The centerpiece, the most holy object, is the Ark of the Covenant. It's a wooden chest overlaid with gold. But what I found fascinating is what goes inside the Ark versus what goes on top of it.
Oh, the symbolism there is incredible. Placed inside the Ark are the 2 stone tablets, the testimony, and the 10 commandments. It holds the law.
And the law represents the standard they have already proven they cannot keep. It literally represents their failure at the golden calf. But what goes on top?
On top of the Ark is a solid gold slab called the mercy seat. And above the mercy seat are the sculpted cherubim, representing the immediate presence of God. The physical structure of the furniture is preaching a theological message.
God's presence rests on mercy.
Yes. God's presence rests upon the platform of mercy, and that mercy literally, physically covers the demands of the broken law below it. The architecture proves that grace covers the law.
The mechanism of that symbolism is so powerful. It's not just a box. It's a visual representation of how they survive their own failures. And the priests who serve in this tabernacle, Aaron and his sons, are given these incredibly elaborate garments.
The priestly vestments?
Yeah, the text specifically notes that the clothing is for glory and for beauty. It isn't just utilitarian workwear to keep the blood off them while they sacrifice animals. I was reading about the high priest's robe, and there's this detail about the hem.
The bells and the pomegranates.
Right. They're instructed to attach alternating golden bells and little pomegranates made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. I could not figure out the purpose of bells and yarn fruit.
Our sources, particularly the older commentaries, offer a beautiful interpretation of this specific garment. The bells represent the joyful sound of the truth being proclaimed.
Okay, that makes sense. Sound equals truth.
As the priest moves around the holy place, the bells physically ring out, signaling to the people outside that he is alive, active, and accepted in the presence of God on their behalf. The pomegranates, which in the ancient world were a symbol of fragrance, sweetness, and abundance, represent the sweet savor of good actions, of a life actually lived well. It is the marriage of sound and substance.
Our words, our joyful sounds must always be accompanied by the sweet fruit of our actions. You can't just be a noisy bell seeking attention. You have to have the quiet, nourishing fruit right next to it.
Exactly.
And speaking of integrating these high ideals into the rhythm of real life, we cannot ignore the capstone of this entire building project.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of these intense architectural blueprints, God stops and repeats the command to observe the Sabbath.
It almost feels like a typo in the text.
It feels like an interruption, but our sources suggest is the ultimate linchpin of the whole system.
It is entirely intentional. He tells them essentially, you are about to embark on building the most incredible, holy, divinely mandated structure in the history of the world. But you must still stop working on the 7th day.
Wow.
Even the holy work of building the tabernacle must pause for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is designed to be a sanctuary in time, just as the tabernacle is a sanctuary in space.
Think about how radical that is for a culture obsessed with endless production. In the 21st century, your worth is almost entirely tied to your output. Our phones tether us to our emails and our Slack channels 24/7. We feel guilty if we aren't hustling.
We really do. Rest feels like failure.
In that context, deliberately resting is an act of sheer rebellion. Keeping a Sabbath a hard stop on production is a radical declaration that you are not a machine. You are not a human resource to be mined. And most importantly, you are not a slave in Egypt anymore.
Pharaoh demanded bricks without straw every single day.
Right. But the God of the Exodus demands that you stop and enjoy the freedom he gave you.
It is the ultimate antidote to the iron furnace mentality. Slaves are defined by the reality that they cannot rest. Free people can.
I love how the text extends this dignity to the actual labor of the people. When God commissions the building of this tabernacle, he doesn't just hand the blueprints to Moses and say, figure out how to get this built. He specifically calls out two men by name, Bezalel and Aholiab.
The artisans.
And the text says God filled them with the spirit of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, specifically for craftsmanship, for working in gold, silver, bronze, cutting stones, and carving wood.
This is a monumental detail in the text. It is the very first time in the biblical narrative that anyone is described as being filled with the Spirit of God. And it isn't a priest, it isn't a prophet, and it isn't a king. It's an artist and an engineer.
That completely elevates how we should view our daily work. It means your daily labor, your arts, your crafts, your coding, your spreadsheets, your building projects, they can be a divine calling.
All of it matters.
The text is validating that God cares deeply about the beauty, the functionality, and the order of the material world. It leaves us with a brilliant reflection question. How are you using your specific skills, your unique craftsmanship, to build something beautiful and orderly in your sphere of influence? How are you actively pushing back the chaos in your home, your workplace, or your community with the tools you've been given?
Because pushing back the chaos is ultimately what the tabernacle represents. It is the restoration of order, beauty, and relational intimacy in the midst of a barren, unpredictable wilderness.
It's an oasis.
It is the visible proof of God dwelling with humanity, not as an abstract concept in the sky, but right in the center of their camp, surrounded by the dirt and dust of their tents.
And when they finally finish the work, following the pattern exactly as they were shown, the book of Exodus ends with this breathtaking full-circle scene. The glory of the Lord, the massive cloud that had been hovering on top of the terrifying, untouchable mountain, descends.
It comes down to them.
It moves off the peak and actually fills the tabernacle. The divine presence moves from the remote distance right into the center of their daily lives.
It is the successful, albeit fragile, completion of the transformation we discussed at the beginning of our deep dive. They finally have a framework. They have a dwelling place. They have learned step by step how a traumatized people can begin to live in proximity to the divine.
As we wrap up this incredible journey through the sources, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. It's the profound irony of the entire Exodus narrative. If you look at the timeline, it took only a few weeks of plagues and a walk through the Red Sea to get Israel physically out of Egypt.
Right. The escape was fast.
But as the horrific incident with the golden calf proves, and as the rest of their journey will show, it took 40 years of wandering in the wilderness to get Egypt out of Israel.
The geography changed in an instant. The psychology, the internal rewiring of their default settings took a lifetime.
So think about your own timeline. You may have moved on from a past trauma. You may have physically walked away from a bad habit, quit a toxic workplace, or left an unhealthy relationship. The external chains are off. But how much of that Egypt is still shaping your internal reactions?
It's a sobering question.
When the pressure is on, when the leadership is absent, when the uncertainty of the wilderness gets high, do you automatically revert to the golden calves of your past to cope? The journey out of bondage is only the beginning of the story. The real work is letting the architecture of grace and order rebuild your mind, little by little.
We hope the insights from this text have provided you with a new framework for that rebuilding process. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.